The ground at the cemetery was still soft from last week's thaw. My shoes sank a little with every step, and the smell of turned soil clung to the air, damp and raw, like potatoes pulled too early from the earth. A dove cried somewhere past the oak line, the note carrying over the murmured prayers, and I found myself staring at the casket, not the pastor. The lilies had been handled too much. Their edges had browned overnight. Thomas hated lilies, said they reminded him of doctors' offices, but they were all the florist had left. I stood so still that my gloves grew warm and damp inside. The wind lifted the corner of the pastor's black stole and set it flapping, quiet as a flag half-mast. "Mom?" Matthew's voice came near my shoulder. His hand hovered before it landed flat against my back. The weight was firm, not comforting like holding a door open, not holding me up. "If it's too much, we can step aside." I kept my eyes on the box. "I can stand." His hand lifted. On my other side, Stephen bent to touch his face as though wiping tears, but when he straightened, his eyes were dry. Marina's perfume drifted ahead of her, lemon and starch. She stood in white boots that kept sinking into the lawn, her smile tight as though bracing for a photograph. The pastor said Thomas's name, the full name no one used except Banks. I heard Isla sniff behind me, a wet, involuntary sound. A shovel scraped stone, metal on metal, and the whole circle flinched. The first thump of soil rattled the lid like someone knocking from inside. That was when my coat shivered. I fumbled in the pocket, meaning to silence it before anyone saw. The glass glowed pale in the weak daylight. 2 lines blinked from an unknown number. He knew. They knew he knew. "Don't trust them." Another buzz came before my breath steadied. "If you drink what they hand you, you won't wake up." I pressed the phone flat against my thigh. The words crawled under my skin colder than the wind. Stephen leaned closer, his voice just for me. "You should sit." Marina brought water. Marina was already pulling a bottle from her bag. The cap turned just enough to crack the seal. "Please," she said, tilting it toward me. "You look faint." Her eyes softened on the surface but stayed watchful underneath. "I'm fine." My lips curved politely. My hands stayed inside my gloves. When the pastor closed his book, people began to shuffle. Isla pressed a tissue into my palm and whispered, "Lights on, door open, always." The tissue smelled faintly of lavender. Behind me, someone coughed into their sleeve, and a gust carried the chemical bite of cough drops. Matthew was already speaking with the director, his voice brisk. "Yes, that's right. Simple. No fuss. That's what Dad would have wanted. But it wasn't." Thomas loved a fuss pie after choir, chess matches that stretched past midnight, talking too long about biographies no one else had read. The walk back to the car felt longer than it should. I caught the hollow click of Marina's heels hitting the sidewalk again, relieved to be off the grass. Stephen fell into step beside me, his phone pocketed now. "Don't worry," he said low. "We'll take care of everything. Everything is a lot." His laugh was quick, too quick. That's what family is for. At home, the door gave with its usual sigh, the old frame yielding the way it always had. The smell of coffee grounds gone stale still clung to the air, mixed with something yeasty. Someone had already set casseroles on the table. Foil pans glinted under the dining room light. Marina laid plates without asking, arranging them as if she lived here. Matthew shook out cloth napkins like banners, 3 sharp snaps. Stephen washed his hands at the sink, scrubbing until his knuckles pinked, watching the water slide down the drain as if it carried secrets. "Sit," Marina said. Her tone had the shape of care but the spine of command. I sat because standing meant fighting, and I had no strength left. She placed a plate in front of me. Mashed potatoes, pale ham, soft rolls cut in half. Nothing crisp, nothing sharp. A glass of water followed, sweating on the table, the wedge of lemon floating bright as warning. My phone vibrated once more where I had hidden it in my coat. I excused myself to the bookstore half of the house, flicked on the small sunflower pattern lamp near the register, and pulled the message into the light. Check the blue ledger. Under the till. The drawer stuck the way it always did, then slid open with a sigh. I reached beneath, fingers brushing the baseball card Thomas called our retirement plan, until I felt the cloth cover. Blue. Oil stains marked the corner where his thumb had always rested. The last page bore his neat block letters, entries, and notes about cash. But 3 new lines were circled, ink pressed hard enough to dent: roof repair, coffee service, supply restock, none of which had ever happened. From the kitchen, I heard a cupboard close softly, as if someone hoped not to be heard. The refrigerator clicked on. For a long moment, I watched the grooves left by the impatient circles in the ledger. The phone buzzed again. One more line. He was healthy. Ask for the clinic report. Tell no one why. The lamp threw my reflection onto the glass of the door. A widow in a black coat holding a ledger like scripture. Behind me, plates clinked, voices dropped. I closed the book, slid it into my bag, and turned off the light. I poured the untouched water down the sink before anyone noticed. The lemon stung my eyes as it slid away, a single fat drop lingering on the rim before falling. I stood listening to the wind outside, and for the first time since the grave, I spoke out loud though no one stood in the room. I hear you. The house always carried voices differently after a funeral. Too many bodies in one place, words bouncing against the ceiling until they sounded hollow. From the doorway of the bookstore, I could see them at my dining table, my 2 sons and Marina eating in small, rehearsed bites. The casserole steam fogged the window behind them. Their silhouettes blurred, as if the glass wanted to protect me from recognizing my own children. I sat back down at the table. The water glass was gone. Stephen must have cleared it without asking. In its place, a folded napkin waited, stiff and clean. My appetite felt like paper thin, breakable. I broke a roll and chewed, though it turned to paste in my mouth. Matthew tapped his fork twice against the plate before he spoke. Mom, you know the bookstore isn't what it used to be. His tone had the rhythm of a listing agent showing a house, soft but firm, rehearsed. Foot traffic is down, Amazon, ebooks, all that. I think it's time to move forward. The words move forward hung in the air. Marina nodded, lowering her gaze to her untouched potatoes. It's too much work for you, she added, smoothing her scarf as if the lemon silk were the point. Thomas wouldn't want you to struggle. I looked at her long enough for her to look away. Thomas liked the struggle, I said. He liked the smell of paper on his hands. He said it meant he had done something honest that day. Stephen pushed food around his plate, avoiding my eyes. We just think, he began, then stopped. He set the fork down carefully, parallel with the knife. We just think you'd be more comfortable somewhere smaller. With help, meals, company, security. He didn't say the word retirement home. He didn't need to. It settled in the space between us, sourer than the lemon water. The house creaked with the wind. I heard Isla's wind chimes outside, a clatter of notes just sharp enough to cut. I thought of the ledger under the till, the circled words pressed deep. My jaw ached from holding still. You've both been busy, I said, folding my napkin though it wasn't dirty. So busy that the neighbors noticed more than I did. Matthew's head lifted slightly. What do you mean? Isla saw you at the shop with your father, last week. She said he looked fine, strong, not like a man about to collapse. His smile slipped, just a thread, then refastened. She must be mistaken. Dad wasn't well. Stephen coughed into his hand, too quickly, as though to cover something. When he lowered it, his palm stayed pressed against his lips longer than necessary. You know how memory is, Mom. People see what they want to see. I see what I saw. My voice came out steady, surprising even me. Your father could carry a box of hardcovers without stopping for breath. He sharpened his own mower blades last Sunday. No one answered. The only sound was the refrigerator humming and the scrape of Marina's chair as she stood, smoothing her skirt. "I'll pack up the leftovers," she said brightly. "You shouldn't fuss with dishes tonight." The kitchen swallowed her. Her heels tapped quick across the linoleum. Matthew leaned forward, elbows on the table. His cologne a sharp cedar I didn't recognize, mixed with the faint sourness of funeral lilies. "Mom, I know this is a lot, but we can make it easier. Let us handle the paperwork, the bank, the utilities, even the insurance claims." "You shouldn't worry." He smiled again, but this one didn't reach his eyes. His teeth showed, white and even, and for a second I saw not my son, but a salesman closing a deal. "I'll think about it," I said. The lie settled bitter on my tongue, heavier than any casserole. Marina returned with foil packets, stacking them in neat towers on the counter. "We'll stop by tomorrow to help sort through Dad's things. Clothes, tools, that sort of thing." "You'll do no such thing," I said before I could measure it. The words landed like a hammer, shocking the air silent. Even the refrigerator seemed to pause. Matthew blinked, then chuckled softly, shaking his head as if at a child refusing vegetables. "We just want to help, Mom. That's all. Your father's shirts can stay where they are," I said. "At least until I decide otherwise." For the first time that night, Stephen met my eyes. His were darker than Thomas's, darker than mine, a shadowed brown. Something flickered there, not grief, not care, something like calculation. He looked away first. The evening dissolved soon after. Marina kissed my cheek, her perfume sharp in my nose. Matthew hugged me stiffly, whispering, "Sleep well," the way you say it to someone who might not wake. Stephen's hand lingered on my shoulder a fraction longer than necessary, then dropped. When the door shut behind them, the house exhaled. I stood in the quiet, listening to the chimes clatter against the night wind, and thought about the text that warned me not to drink. I thought about the ledger's circled lies, and I thought about how strange it was, the way my own children's concern felt less like protection and more like pressure. Upstairs, the bedroom smelled faintly of Thomas's aftershave cedar and soap. I sat on the edge of the bed, my gloves still on, and opened my phone one last time. The number had sent no new messages, but the old words glowed back at me. He knew. Don't trust them. I slipped the phone under my pillow and lay down without undressing. The house creaked again, and I realized it wasn't just the wind that made me shiver. It was the feeling of being watched in your own home, by the people who called you Mom. Morning made everything look falsely clean. Sun on the dining table turned the foil over casseroles into a river of light, and for a second I could pretend the night had been ordinary leftovers. Quiet. The kind of tired that a nap fixes. Then the wind shifted, and lilies reached me from the trash bin like a doctor's waiting room. I put on Thomas's cardigan, the navy one with the elbow patches smoothed shiny, and went to the bookstore before I let myself think. The till stuck, then yielded with its old breath. I eased the blue ledger out, the cloth cover still warm from where I slept with it under my pillow, ridiculous and necessary. The last page waited, patient as a witness. Roof repair, coffee service, supply restock. Circles pressed deep, grooves you could feel with your eyes closed. The circled dates lined up with 3 days when Matthew had stopped by to help Dad with boxes. He always announced his help the way you announce a favor you'll want credit for later. Under the counter sat Thomas's coin sorter, a thrift store thing with a crack near the quarter slot. Inside were receipts rubber-banded together, the ink faded to tea color. Someone had slid 3 new ones under the band. The paper was brighter, the numbers too big. An equipment rental from a place off Route 28. A service call from a consultant with no name, only an address P.O. Box. A lunch tab that could have fed the choir twice. Each total stung like lemon juice in a cut. Isla's key rattled in the side door before her knock. She never came to the front unless she was performing neighborliness for a festival. She held a thermos and a bag that said Farmer's Market, though the market wouldn't open for 2 more months. "Coffee," she said, lifting the thermos. "Not the church kind. Cardamom, brown sugar. You'll hate it if you're honest, but it'll get your pulse moving." She saw the ledger and set the thermos down without taking off her gloves. Find something or lose something. Both. I pushed the ledger halfway toward her, not offering, not hiding. "You said you saw Matthew with Thomas last week." "I did." She unwound her scarf, bright knit stripes that made her look like a flag for a country I'd rather live in. "Tuesday, I think. I was trimming the rose canes. He had that file folder he pretends is casual. They were laughing at first. Then Matthew put his hand on your husband's shoulder, in that way he has gentle like a vet with a nervous dog, and somehow the dog ends up in a crate. What did Thomas do?" Stepped sideways out from under it, smiled. Said something and tapped the counter twice. Isla mimed the gesture. 2 knuckles, soft. He only does that when he's thinking hard, or when he's trying not to say something he'll regret. I opened the ledger to a random page. A doodle in the margin Thomas's habit when a customer was late or a story got good. A bird, badly drawn but hopeful. My throat tightened a little, and then let go. "I'm going to the bank," I said. "I'll drive," Isla said, already looping her scarf back. The thermos abandoned like a promise we could keep later. At the bank, the heater blasted air that smelled like carpet glue and peppermint. The manager had changed, Mr. Adler retired last summer, and now there was a woman with hair the color of a penny and a nameplate that said Padel, branch manager. She offered a chair with her eyes before she moved her mouth. "Mrs. Ross," she said, using the tone people reserve for widows and children. "I'm so sorry about Thomas. Thank you." I placed the ledger on my lap like a lapdog that might bite. "I need to see recent activity on our accounts. Savings, checking. Anything with my name and Thomas's together." "Of course." Her fingers moved with relief over the keyboard, happy to be doing something simple. Numbers. Clicks. A little frown. More clicks. She turned her screen slightly. A respect gesture that still showed me nothing but blue. "There are 3 withdrawals in the last 2 months, she said carefully. 1,000, then 3, then 4. Cash. By whom? She slid a paper across to me with 2 gloved fingers before remembering bureaucracy and pulling it back. "I'm sorry we don't usually hand. Let me print the authorization slips." The printer coughed as if outraged at being made to perform. She laid the slips in a row, face up, boxes of type, signature lines like goalposts. Each line bore Thomas's name, the letters too careful, the T taller than usual, as if he had been concentrating. My stomach recognized the forgery before my eyes admitted it. Thomas's hand could be sloppy when he was hungry. This was a student tracing a teacher. "Did he come in alone?" I asked. "Mrs. Patel looked at the paper as though it might answer for her. "Our notes say he was escorted." "Family." "Which family?" The word tasted strange. "Your son Matthew," she said, and her eyes flicked up fast to judge my flinch. "And once, Stephen. They said he was having trouble reading the forms." New glasses. His glasses were newer than mine. I folded my hands over the ledger and felt the pages through the cloth like a heartbeat. "I'd like copies. I can do that." She tapped a key and said nothing more, and in her silence I could hear the careful world she lived in: policy lines, training scripts, the way you stand between a customer and a complaint. On the way out, Isla stopped me by the potted ficus that has never grown. "You okay?" "I don't know what that means." The ficus leaf had a scratch across it like a healed scar. I touched it instead of touching Isla's arm. We didn't talk in the car. The seat heater felt like a guilty pleasure against my back. Outside, sunlight bounced off the glazed crust of snow that lingered in the church lot, making everything look expensive and clean, like photographs in a real estate brochure. The insurance office sat in a low building between a laundromat and a tax place with a dancing Statue of Liberty in front. The Liberty waved with the exhausted hope of someone who'd chosen a mascot for a joke and found herself in a costume instead of a punchline. Inside, a young man with a beard that tried too hard looked up from a monitor. His tie was crooked in a way that ruined the effect of trying. "Can I help you? I'm Evelyn Ross." I found my voice at the bottom of a well and hauled it up. "I need to know the status of my husband's life insurance policy." He searched our name, blinked, and straightened his tie as though the computer had judged him. "Yes. There was an increase 6 months ago, from 5 to 50. Who requested the change? Looks like joint consent." He turned the screen slightly. "We have a signature on file for Mr. Ross, and an electronic consent for the co-owner." He scrolled. His eyes moved. "That would be you. I didn't sign anything." He cleared his throat the way people do when they wish you would accept the world as an island. "It shows here. May I see the consent form?" He moved reluctantly, like a man getting out of a warm bath. The printer sulked again and handed over a page. My name walked across it in letters that could have fooled a bank, but not a woman who spent 40 years writing report cards by hand. E, V, E, L, each letter too even. No hesitation on the Y. Thomas always teased me about how it worried the line before committing to the curl. This Y went straight, confident as a thief. "Who submitted this?" I asked. He pointed at a stamp. Agent ID. A number. A name I recognized. W. Lasky. We'd met him once in a strip mall next to a nail salon. He'd given Thomas a pen that said Lasky Protects and a calendar with a farm dog on each month. I had thrown the calendar away after June because the dogs made me lonely in a way people didn't. "Is Mr. Lasky here?" I asked. "He left the firm." The pause felt scripted. "Last month. Do you have his notes? Emails? Any appointment logs? I'd need to request that from..." "Request it." We drove home with the heater off, letting cold keep us honest. Isla parked and left the engine running so the radio could whisper for company. A pop song about a woman who didn't need anyone told me to lift my hands. I kept them in my lap. "Come in," she said. "I'll make eggs. I can't taste anything right now." "Eggs don't need taste. They need heat." In my kitchen, she cracked shells against the rim of a metal bowl the way my mother had, and for a second the sound braided me to women who had survived worse, because there were mouths to feed. I took down plates, my hands steadied on ordinary china the way they never did on forms. My phone buzzed on the counter. A single line blinked up from the number that refused to introduce itself. "Clinic, East 14th, Suite 206. Ask for records. Do not say poison." Isla turned off the burner and slid eggs onto plates. "Spam?" she asked without looking up. "Directions," I said, and the syllables slotted into place like a key turning in an old lock. The clinic had frosted glass and the smell of lemon cleaner so strong it made my tongue numb. A television in the corner played a show where doctors solved crimes with perfect hair. The nurse at the desk wore pink scrubs with cartoon bones and a name tag that said, Mel. "Hi there," she said in a cheerfulness that knew it was a costume. "How can I help you? My husband had a physical here last week. I need a copy of his report." "Name?" "Ross." "Thomas." "Thomas." She typed with nails like seashells, long but practical. "Looks like, yes. Tuesday afternoon. You're in luck. The doctor's notes are finalized. I'd like the full report." Her smile tugged at the corners. "We can release records with a signed authorization." She angled a form toward me. "Normally we send by mail. 7 to 10 business days. I'll wait." "It doesn't quite work." "Mel," I said, and put both hands flat on the counter as if pressing dough. "Please." She looked at my hands, at the way the cardigan sleeves had pilled where Thomas's watch used to catch the yarn when we hugged in the kitchen. She slid the form closer. "Sign here," she said quietly. "I'll see what I can do." The report came to me in an envelope with a window like a small eye. Blood pressure, excellent. Labs, normal. Heart, good. No anomalies. Recommendations: keep walking, less salt. At the bottom, the signature curled like a cat's tail. Healthy. On the sidewalk outside, Isla read over my shoulder without pretending not to. The wind hit us in the face and made our eyes water. So, not a stroke waiting to happen, she said. Not a stroke waiting to happen, I repeated, and my breath made a cloud that hung between us like a thought. We crossed the street slowly, letting the walk sign blink impatiently at our pace. On the corner, a man in a sandwich board advertised tax advances. The board creaked when he moved, wood against wood, a complaint. We drove home without the radio. At the house, the answering machine blinked a red one. No one had called the line in months. We were text people now. I pressed play because I wanted my life to do what I asked for once today. Matthew's voice filled the kitchen, honeyed and urgent. Mom, hey, just checking in. Stephen and I are coming by at 7. We'll bring dinner, take care of a few papers. Don't worry your head about the details. Isla looked at the clock. 5:12. You want me to stay? She asked. I wiped a circle of condensation from the window where someone Thomas had once written a smiley face and a check mark. The glass squeaked, bright and clean and useless. Yes, I said, but not where they can see you. I took the report and the ledger to the bookstore, turned on the sunflower lamp, and laid both on the counter like a matched set. The blue cloth and the clinic letterhead looked stubborn together. In the glass of the front door, my reflection raised its chin the way my mother had when salesmen came to push. The wind chimes on the fence began to ring as the gusts picked up, not a melody but a warning. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard ticked. In 2 hours, my sons would carry in dinner like peace offerings and lay papers in front of me like blankets. I slid the ledger into my bag, folded the clinic report into the pocket of Thomas's cardigan, and pressed my palms once to the counter 2 taps, soft, exactly where he used to tap when he was thinking hard. Come on, I whispered to the room, to the bird doodle, to the books that had outlasted better storms. Let's see what breaks next. By the time their headlights crawled across my front window, the casserole foil had dulled and the eggs had gone cold. I hadn't eaten. The clinic report pressed against my ribs inside the cardigan pocket, a weight that burned hotter than food ever could. The knock came too polite, knuckles spaced like a metronome. 3 beats, a rhythm for people who want to be heard but not questioned. When I opened the door, Marina stood in front with a paper bag. Steam curled from the top, bringing the smell of garlic and basil. Too generous for a weekday, too staged for grief. Behind her, Matthew carried 2 bottles of wine, one red, one white, like a magician presenting options he already knew the answer to. Stephen had nothing in his hands, only his phone, screen bright against his jaw as he whispered, "Yes, we're here now." I stepped aside. The bag brushed my arm as Marina swept in, her perfume blooming in the narrow hall. "Lasagna," she said lightly, though her tone waited for applause. "Comfort food." Matthew kissed my cheek. His cologne hit me again. Cedar, sharp, nothing of Thomas. Stephen didn't try. He slid the phone into his pocket, but his fingers twitched against the fabric as if itching to pull it back out. In the kitchen, Marina unpacked dishes too new to be hers. The lasagna tray had the glossy black bottom of catering, not casserole. She slid it into the oven to stay warm, though I hadn't seen her switch it on. Her movements were rehearsed, the way someone acts in a house they already imagine as theirs. Matthew set the wine down on the table and looked at me the way you look at a notary. We thought we could eat, then go over some paperwork. Just basics. House expenses, shop accounts, Dad's insurance. The word insurance landed between us like a stone in water. No one rippled. Stephen finally spoke. "You don't need to worry about the details, Mom. It's too much right now." He glanced toward Marina, then back at me. "We'll handle it." The cardigan pocket burned. I poured water into glasses from the tap, the way Thomas used to. No ice, no fuss. I'd like to see every paper before I sign anything, I said. The sentence balanced on my tongue like a blade. Matthew smiled, wide and wrong. Of course, that's what family's for. He slid a folder from his bag, thick with tabs. The sound of paper hitting wood echoed too loud in the small room. Saturday. The lasagna steamed quietly in its black tray, untouched. Marina served herself a square, cutting neat edges as if she were performing surgery. I forked salad onto my plate, the lettuce tasting of fridge air. Matthew opened the folder. Here's the first. A gust rattled the wind chimes outside, sharp enough to cut him off. We all froze for a second. Marina's fork hovered above her plate, a shred of spinach dangling. Drafts, Stephen said quickly, shuffling the top pages. Nothing final. His hand covered a signature line too long. I chewed slowly, the lettuce turning to bitter water. Strange, isn't it? I said, keeping my tone level. How Thomas passed his physical with perfect health just 3 days before he collapsed. The fork clinked against Marina's plate. She recovered, dabbing her lips with the napkin, though they were dry. Matthew blinked. Once, twice, then leaned back in his chair. Mom, you shouldn't dig through medical papers. You'll only confuse yourself. Stephen sipped water, though his throat didn't move enough to swallow. What matters is Dad's gone. We all miss him. Let's focus on you. I am focusing on me, I said. My hand found the folded report in the cardigan pocket, fingers pressing the crease. That's why I'll be the one deciding what happens to this house, to the shop, to what Thomas left. Matthew's smile tightened, pulling more at one corner than the other. No one's trying to take anything, Mom. We just want to protect you. Paperwork can get tricky. Mistakes cost money. His words slid like oil. I remembered Isla's warning. They'll try to convince you you're confused. I set my fork down deliberately, the metal ringing against porcelain. I taught English 35 years, I said. I graded essays in triplicate. I tracked every library fine down to the dime. I don't confuse numbers. Silence. Even the refrigerator hum seemed to hesitate. Then Marina spoke, her voice too sweet. It's not about intelligence, Evelyn. It's about stress. Trauma can make anyone vulnerable. I've seen it. That's why I think a smaller place, maybe a community with support, would be, don't. I cut in, the single syllable sharper than I intended. Her eyes widened, then cooled. She folded her napkin with precise creases, slow enough to draw attention. Matthew pushed the folder an inch closer to me. Just look, Mom. At least look. The top page bore my name already filled in. Neat block letters not my own. Underneath, the line for co-signer. Blank. Waiting. The cardigan pocket seemed to pulse. I didn't pull out the report. Not yet. Instead, I lifted my glass and drank, though the water tasted faintly metallic. My eyes stayed on Matthew's. He didn't blink. Stephen shifted, foot tapping against the floor, quick and irregular. We should finish dinner, he said, but no one reached for food. The lasagna cooled untouched, the steam fading into the ceiling. The smell of garlic grew thick, cloying, like a cover for something spoiled. At last I said, "Leave the folder." Matthew opened his mouth, closed it. His hand hovered, then retreated. Fine, but don't let it overwhelm you. Call us if you have questions. I stood. My chair legs scraped the floor, sharp as chalk on a board. It's late. Thank you for coming. They didn't argue. Marina packed her folded napkin into her purse, as if even cloth belonged to her. Matthew slipped the wine bottles back into his bag. Stephen pocketed his phone, finally silent. At the door, Matthew leaned close. His cologne cut again, cedar too sharp. Mom, he said softly, almost tender. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The click of the latch sounded like relief when they left. The folder sat fat and silent on the table. I didn't open it, not yet. Instead, I pulled out the clinic report and laid it beside it, truth and lie staring each other down under my kitchen light. The chimes rattled hard against the night wind, a warning that felt almost like applause. I left the folder on the table like a guest I was tired of entertaining, and slept on the couch with the clinic report under my cheek. Sometime before dawn, I woke to the sound of tires hissing on wet street and the clock insisting 5:11 in red. The house felt hollowed and clean in the way empty shells feel smooth where something used to cling. I made coffee too strong and drank it black, punishing and necessary. The first swallow tasted like a promise I hadn't decided to keep. The phone buzzed once on the counter. One line, no greeting, corner cafe, back booth, 10 a.m., ask for Daniel, bring nothing you can't afford to lose. I wrote the words on a sticky note and slid the phone into the cardigan pocket with the report. When the sun finally reached the kitchen window, it came in thin as watered milk. The lilies in the trash had collapsed into themselves, brown edges curled like burnt paper. I tied on Thomas's old scarf scratchy wool that remembered his neck and locked the door twice. The corner cafe smelled like butter and old secrets. The bell over the door wheezed when it rang, a little asthmatic exhale. A waitress with a bee tattoo poured coffee before I asked, the cup heavy in my hand, heat working its way through the ceramic like courage. The back booth sat half in shadow under a faded poster of Niagara Falls. Someone had written, "Don't jump," in tiny letters along the lip of the water with a blue pen. I sat with my back to the wall and watched the door the way Thomas always did, amused at his own pretend paranoia. The third person through was a man in a gray coat, clean but not new, with a face that looked like it had learned more from listening than from talking. "Mrs. Ross?" he asked, stopping before he slid in. His voice was pitched for private rooms. "I'm Daniel." Up close, he smelled faintly of winter air and coffee. He didn't extend a hand. I didn't either. We looked like old spies who had forgotten how this was supposed to go. "You've been sending the messages," I said. "Yes." He waited while the waitress poured him coffee, then added 2 sugar packets without looking down. I would have called, but calls are easier to notice. "By whom?" "People who want you confused." He stirred, slow circles. "Your husband hired me 3 weeks ago." The coffee in my mouth went cold. "Thomas?" He liked to come to the shop before opening, you at the register, him pretending to dust. He didn't want to worry you until he understood what he was seeing. Daniel reached inside his coat and placed a brown folder between the salt and pepper like an offering. The paper edges had the tired look of things handled too often. I didn't touch it. What did he think he was seeing? A plan. Sloppy at first, then bolder, pressuring him to increase insurance, pushing guardianship language for you. Small test to see how much you'd tolerate. He lifted his coffee and blew across it. He didn't like tests. I kept my hands around my cup so he wouldn't see them shake. "Why didn't you go to the police the moment my husband died?" "Police like clean stories. Yours was dusty." He slid a small recorder out and set it beside the folder, not turning it on, letting it be a possibility. "You had a falsified death certificate, a tidy accident narrative, and a doctor with a disappearing signature. I needed something the district attorney would stake his name on." "Like what?" "Numbers, voices." He tapped the folder. "And time." I opened the folder. Photocopies, photos, receipts, printouts, each with a faint coffee ring as if someone had steadied a cup there while deciding whether to keep going. On top lay a photograph of Matthew leaving the hardware store out on County 9, the one that sells fertilizer and cheap rope and every kind of solvent a person could want. He was wearing a cap pulled low as if he'd seen a movie about how to be invisible. In his hand, a small brown bag with a white sticker. The date in the corner whispered last Thursday. "Don't assume what was in the bag," Daniel said softly, reading the places my eyes landed. "Assume he didn't want you to know he was buying it." Beneath that, a partial bank statement, Stephen's account numbers marching downhill, overdraft fees multiplying like a rash. Copy of a personal loan document with a name I didn't recognize and interest that wanted blood. A printout of a build capacity evaluation from a clinic. I did recognize the one downtown that advertises memory screenings on the bus stop. The patient name field was blank. The line for relative present listed a first initial and a last name, M. Ross. A breath pushed out of me before I meant it to. They were going to make me incompetent. They were going to try, Daniel said. There's a difference. He didn't smile. Thomas got in the way of that schedule by dying at the wrong time. The word dying felt like a temp dropped into a job the right word didn't want. I flipped another page. A photo of the side door of my house, glossy hinge reflecting a small slice of a man's coat as he slipped through at night. Another photo of my kitchen window with two faces reflected in the glass. Hard to make out, but one looked like my youngest son wearing a stranger's jaw. Why the messages at the funeral? I asked. Why then? Why like that? Daniel didn't touch his coffee. Because I watched your sons choose the fastest funeral home, the smallest service, the least time between paperwork and burial. When I saw the pastor look confused at the empty pews, I stopped being polite. You had to hesitate. Just enough to reach for your own questions before their answers arrived. He glanced at my cup. It seems to have worked. The recorder on the table looked like it wanted to be turned on. He didn't reach for it. He reached for a different envelope inside the folder and slid it free. I want you to hear something. Not here. He nodded toward the restroom sign, then toward the back exit door with the push bar. There's a lot behind the cafe. Dumpster, smoking chair, one stubborn cat. Fewer ears. Outside, the air had that raw metal taste, like you could cut your tongue just breathing. A calico watched us from under the dumpster with the unimpressed patience of street animals. Daniel sat on the smoking chair, the slats cold enough to make him flinch, and turned the recorder on. He didn't aim it at me like a weapon. He set it on his knee, pointed toward the ground. Voices hissed through, shakier than the movies make them, partly because microphones hear the parts we pretend not to hear. The first voice was Matthew's, lower than I remember from the high school talent show when he sang John Denver too fast. No paper trail, cash. We can say it was his heart. He's 70. People don't ask questions at 70. Then Stephen, shorter sentences that sounded like he was trying to keep up with himself. The certificate we get Lasky to make sure the ER doc codes it clean. If mom asks, it's stress. She trusts me. Wind clattered the chimes at the cafe door, and the cat blinked slow. I felt my breath shorten and counted the ribs inside my coat, under my fingers like beads. Daniel let the recording run another 10 seconds, then clicked it off. He watched my face the way a nurse watches after a shot, ready for the drop. They were angry, I said, not because it was the right word, but because no other word came. Or scared. Both. He slid the recorder back into his pocket. People who are drowning don't debate whether they can swim. They climb whatever is closest. Sometimes that's a person. Me. You. He stood, rubbing his hands together for warmth, and the calico decided we were boring, and left. There's one more thing. You need to hear it only if you can use it. Say it. They moved up the guardianship meeting. He pulled a folded sheet from his coat and let me see the letterhead without reading it aloud. The judge's name was a familiar one, the kind that shows up at charity dinners. Tomorrow morning, 10. They'll present a preliminary evaluation and ask for temporary authority over health and finances. It won't stick if the court sees you. Steady. With counsel. With reasons. But if you stay home, someone will make decisions for you by lunch. I pictured my table with its fat folder trying to look harmless. You have counsel. I have a name. I'll put you in the room with her in 2 hours. She wants clean facts, not feelings. He tilted his head. Can you give her that? I've been a librarian longer than they've been adults, I said. Facts are how I breathe. We went back inside. The cafe felt warmer than it had, or maybe I had finally accepted the coffee. He sat again, but this time on the edge of the booth like the bell would ring any second. "Evelyn," he said, using my first name as if asking permission to be on my side. "This is the part where people get theatrical. Burn the folder, confront the sons, drive to the hospital and drag a doctor into the street. That's how stories move, but it's not how cases move." "How do cases move?" "Quietly, with copies, with timestamps." He slid a small stack of clear sleeves across to me, each with a slip of paper inside. "These are checklists. What to bring to the judge, what not to say, which is mostly everything except the things on the list." I turned the first sleeve over. The words were dull and practical. ID, marriage certificate, clinic report, bank copies, insurance consent form copy, list of medications, none, neighbor statement, optional. At the bottom, a small line. "Do not mention poison. Let the DA say it." The waitress set down a plate of toast we hadn't ordered and winked as if she were part of a club she didn't know the name of. Butter melted into the bread in a way that made me suddenly, irrationally angry. I wanted to be angry at something that didn't look like my sons. "Why are you helping?" I asked, and I meant it the way a drowning person asks a stranger's hand who they are. "Your husband paid me," he said, plain. "And he asked me to keep going if he couldn't." Then softer. "And because I have a mother." I folded the sleeves back into the folder and set my palm on it, the way Thomas used to steady things that might topple. "What now?" "Now," Daniel said, "you go home and put on something boring and steady. Your church clothes without the grief. You call Isla and ask her to sit in the front row behind you. People look at a woman and then at who believes her. You bring the clinic report and the bank slips and you say exactly 7 sentences when the judge asks why you're opposing a temporary order. 7. Short ones, no metaphors." I stood. The bell wheezed again when we left, and the parking lot's wind tried to take my scarf. Daniel walked me to the car without pretending to be a gentleman, and without pretending not to be. Before I opened the door, he said, "One more thing. Yes. If they offer you coffee tonight," he said, "don't take it. Not even from the nice neighbor, not even from me. I make my own," I said. "I know." He nodded once, small, approving. "That's why you'll be fine." I drove home down streets that knew my tires and turned onto my block where the wind chimes talked to each other across the yards. On my table, the folder waited, and beside it I put Daniel's truth-facing performance under the same light. I took out a pen and wrote a list, the way I taught 7th graders to outline arguments, bullets, verbs, no adjectives. The house held still while I worked. When I was done, I made coffee that was mine and drank it at the sink, the bitter riding my tongue like a promise I'd finally decided to keep. The courthouse smelled like floor wax and old paper, a smell that never left your clothes even after you went home. I had worn the gray dress Thomas liked because it looked sensible but stern. His words. Isla walked beside me in her cranberry coat, the color so sharp it felt like armor. She didn't speak as we climbed the stone steps. Her silence was a kind of loyalty. Inside, the clerk's voice echoed names as if calling roll in a school full of tired children. Ross guardianship petition. The syllables clanged in my chest. My hands shook only once. I pressed them flat against the folder Daniel had given me until they steadied. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, but the ceiling was high enough to make voices sound important. My son sat at the table to the right, Marina behind them like a shadow stitched to the bench, Matthew in his navy suit, tie knotted too perfectly, Stephen restless, his knee bouncing under the wood. They didn't look at me at first. When they finally did, Matthew's smile was the same one he'd used at the kitchen table, calm as a mask. Judge Miller adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "We are here to consider a petition for temporary guardianship of Mrs. Evelyn Ross." "Petitioners, please proceed." Matthew rose, smoothing his tie, papers in hand. Your Honor, our mother has been under considerable strain since our father's passing. We have observed erratic behavior, paranoia, and difficulty managing financial matters. We respectfully request temporary authority to handle her estate and medical decisions until she regains stability. His voice was silk over wire. He used words like respectfully and temporary, but each syllable reached for permanence. Stephen added quickly, "She's been visiting the police, asking strange questions, accusing us without evidence. We worry for her safety and the community's." His knee bounced faster. The judge looked at me. "Mrs. Ross, do you have representation?" A woman rose from my side, her suit the color of ink and her hair streaked iron gray. "Linda Warner, Your Honor. I represent Mrs. Ross. We oppose this petition." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Linda didn't grandstand. She placed the folder on the desk, opened it with the precision of a surgeon. "We have documents showing Mrs. Ross is of sound mind and capable of managing her affairs. We also have evidence suggesting financial motives for this petition." Matthew shifted. The first crack. Linda handed copies to the judge. Thomas's clean bill of health from the clinic, the bank withdrawal slips signed shakily in his name, the insurance increase form with a forged version of my hand. "These inconsistencies raise questions, Your Honor, about who is truly protecting whom." The judge flipped through pages, his eyebrows narrowing. He looked up. "Mrs. Ross, will you speak briefly for the record?" I stood, my legs steady though. The floor felt slick with memory. I had written my sentences the night before, stripped of adjectives like Daniel taught me. I manage my own house. I manage the bookstore. I pay bills on time. I am not confused. I know my sons want control of my estate. I oppose this petition. 7 sentences, no more. My voice carried the way chalk squeaks on a board when you press too hard, sharp, undeniable. The judge looked at me for a long moment. Then he asked Matthew, "Do you have medical testimony?" "Yes, Your Honor." Matthew shuffled papers. "We submit a preliminary evaluation from Dr. Barded." Albright, who would friend? Linda cut in. "Dr. Albright has never examined Mrs. Ross. This so-called evaluation is based solely on her son's descriptions. We argue it holds no weight." The judge examined the document, his lips pressing thin. "Noted." "Do you have anything else?" Stephen leaned forward, his voice cracking under speed. "Neighbors have noticed strange behavior. She talks to herself. She refuses food. She imagines threats." I glanced at Isla. She rose, surprising everyone, her red coat blazing against the beige room. "I am her neighbor, Your Honor. I see her daily. She is lucid, grounded, and capable. The only strange behavior I've observed is her sons circling her house when they think no one notices." Gasps rustled through the benches. Marina shifted, crossing her legs, the heel of her shoe tapping impatient rhythms on the wood. The judge exhaled slowly, as though sorting stones from sand. "I find insufficient grounds for temporary guardianship. Petition denied." He banged the gavel, the sound sharp as a slammed book. Relief didn't come like I expected. It didn't wash me clean. It lodged in my chest, tight, heavy, as though victory carried its own weight. Matthew turned toward me, his jaw tight, whispering something low enough for the judge not to hear. "This isn't over." Stephen's eyes flickered not at me, but at the folder still on the desk, the pages he hadn't seen. Hunger and fear warred in the twitch of his lips. The judge dismissed us. The scrape of chairs was a chorus of wood on tile. I gathered my folder carefully, each page aligned. Linda squeezed my arm once, professional but human. "Keep everything safe," she murmured. "We'll need more soon." Number 4. Outside the courtroom, the air felt thinner, as if all the oxygen had been spent in argument. Isla looped her arm through mine. "You didn't shake once," she said. "I'll shake later," I replied. Across the hall, Matthew and Stephen stood with Marina. Her voice carried, sharp and clipped. "You promised this would work." Stephen muttered back. "Shut up." Their words echoed, proof of their cracks. We left the courthouse into a wind that caught Isla's coat like a flag. The chimes from my street seemed to follow me in memory, rattling, warning. Back home, the house smelled of old coffee and paper. I set the folder on the kitchen table again, heavier now with the judge's denial stamped into the record. But I didn't feel safe. Denial of guardianship wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something more dangerous. Cornered animals don't calm down, they bite. That evening, as dusk smeared the sky purple, my phone buzzed with another message. "They know you won today. They'll try again another way. Don't eat with them. Don't sign. Tomorrow, 10 p.m., I'll bring proof you can't ignore." The text glowed against the dim light like a flame you can't decide to touch or flee. I folded it into the pocket with the clinic report, sat at the table where the untouched wine bottles still stood, and listened to the silence of a house that no longer believed in peace. By 8 the next night, the house had arranged its shadows into familiar places. I left the porch light off and set the sunflower lamp aglow in the bookstore, a small warm circle in a field of dark. The wind had teeth. It worried Isla's chimes into a restless clatter and pushed dry leaves down the sidewalk like mice changing houses. I made coffee that no one else would touch and waited with the clinic report under my cardigan and the blue ledger in my bag, the pages a heartbeat against my hip. Daniel knocked once, knuckles soft, like someone asking to borrow flour, and slipped inside when I opened the door. He brought Winter in with him. His coat smelled faintly of cold metal and gasoline. He didn't sit. He laid a new folder on the counter and kept one hand on it, as if it might bolt. "Tell me I didn't imagine yesterday," I said. "You didn't." He flipped the folder open. "You won the stall. Now we move." On top, a printout of a text thread that wasn't mine. The contact name at the top had been redacted to a gray rectangle, but the timestamps were clear. Tuesday, Sao, Muihai A, M. "Make it fast. Mom's routine is coffee then shower. Don't overdo it. Tuesday. Saw. We're bonne mère. Got it. After take her to the bank. We'll handle the rest." The thread went on too long for the phone it lived on to feel like a stranger's. It felt like a hand I used to hold. "Where?" I asked, my throat caught and dry. "How?" "Backups," he said simply. "People who plan crimes forget their carriers love the cloud more than they love privacy." Beneath the thread, still frames from a camera I recognized after a second, my own side yard. Grainy night vision, 2 silhouettes at the side door. One taller Matthew's coat had that narrow arrogance, one with the hunched shoulders of someone who'd lost arguments his whole life and started losing early. Stephen, the timestamp read 3 nights before Thomas fell in our kitchen. A third still, inside, a gloved hand near the coffee tin. The angle told me where the camera sat, the pot rack above the stove. I'd stopped seeing it years ago, the way you stop seeing picture hooks. "You wired my house," I said. "Thomas asked me to." Daniel didn't duck. Limited. Only places he gave me. He wanted a net if he guessed right. He guessed right. The words felt like a brick in my mouth. Daniel slid a small recorder over but didn't touch play. "This one matters, but once you hear it, you can't pretend you didn't." "You ready?" I nodded. The recorder breathed static and then found voices. The kitchen echo made them sound closer than they were, like they could turn and see us now. "Matthew, pour it no, slower. We don't need her in the hospital. We need her quiet." Stephen, whisper rushing. "Half the dropper?" Matthew, "A third." "She's small." A drawer slid open in the recording. I knew it by the stuttering squeak. Our spoons. Clink. The coffee tin lid tapping twice, a habit Thomas had, copied by the hands that were trying to erase him. Daniel clicked the recorder off before the part of me that can't look away insisted on more. The lamp hummed. In the glass of the front door, my reflection had moved closer to the counter, fists balled without asking my permission. "Evelyn," he said softly, "we're done collecting. It's time to hand this to people who wear badges." The precinct's air was a tired stew of copier toner, old coffee, and wet wool. Sergeant Hart met us near a bulletin board with faded National Night Out photos, teenagers taller than their proud mothers. He had a clean shave that made his skin look cold, and a voice like morning announcements. He listened without interrupting. His eyes moved from object to object like a man counting. When Daniel finished the short version, Hart tapped the recorder with a pen, then the still photos, then the printouts. "Chain of custody?" "Every hop logged," Daniel said. He produced a USB stick with a label typed, not handwritten, date, time, source. "You'll get originals." Hart flicked his eyes to me, then to the clinic report in my hands. "And you, Mrs. Ross, you're ready for me to do the part where I make this heavier? This isn't going to feel good." "Nothing has felt good in weeks," I said. "Do the next thing." He nodded like a man who appreciated verbs. "We'll need the medical examiner. If what you say lines up with tox, we'll move before dawn." The ME's office was colder than the courthouse had been. Tile that didn't pretend to be warm, stainless steel, the kind of humming you feel in your teeth. The examiner, Dr. Lynn, had hair she didn't have time to fuss with, and eyes that carried exhaustion like a liquor she'd learned to drink. She read the clinic report twice, looked at the photos with a blank face, and signed the exhumation request with a pen that didn't hesitate. 72 hours for prelim on tox, she said. But the quick strip for methanol, if it's there, we'll know tonight. I sat on a vinyl chair that made unkind noises when you shift and counted ceiling tiles like an old litany. Daniel paced, quiet as waiting. Hart came and went with the patience of a man who'd learned to avoid hoping where science was involved. When the phone on Dr. Lynn's wall finally rang, its bell sounded like a teacher's desk from Mutngin Chin Chumbe Muy Ba. She answered, said nothing for 5 seconds that beat my chest like a small fist, then hung up. "Positive for methanol," she said. "No drama. Level high, not incidental." Hart's pen clicked. Once. Twice. A sound that fell like a gavel. "We move now," he said, already walking. "Warrants. 2. Ross Brothers. A third for the so-called agent." The ride back tasted like adrenaline and cheap breath mints. I called Isla and said only, "Stay inside. Lights off." And she said, "I already did." Like a true friend is the part of your head that gets things before you say them. They took Matthew first. His porch light threw a cone over the front walk, where the snow had hardened into a shining crust. The light made it look festive, like a catalog that forgot to warn you about the ending. He opened the door with his smile, ready to sell, then saw the uniforms and let it die slow. Marina appeared behind him in a robe that tried too hard. "Matthew Ross," Hart said, calm as math. "You're under arrest for suspicion of attempted murder and conspiracy." He read the rights. The words sounded too big in the little entryway, as if they would bruise the paint. Matthew looked at me. Not at Hart, not at the handcuffs, at me. And for a second his face became the child who used to run to the door with wet hair when Thomas came home late from inventory, breathless with something he couldn't tell fast enough. That face vanished, replaced by the man whose mouth had learned to speak in paperwork. "Mom," he said, almost gentle. "I didn't," I said. "You did." He laughed, not with humor. With disbelief, like a man who finally met the stop sign he'd convinced himself was a suggestion. When Hart took his arm, Matthew didn't fight. Marina began crying the way you cry when you want the neighbors to hear. The robe gaped. Lemon perfume tried to make a case for innocence. Stephen ran. They found him 3 blocks over, the squad tires squealing louder than Hart liked. He'd taken a back fence and lost a shoe in someone's thawing yard. His sock was soaked in mud black. When the officers brought him up, He looked smaller without his balance. His eyes found mine and did not blink. "I didn't pour it," he said, as if that were mercy. "I didn't pour it." "You didn't stop it," I said, and heard the ice in my own voice like a lake getting ready to break. Back at the station, fluorescent lights made every face look honest or hungover. Paperwork multiplied like rabbits. Hart kept the room from dissolving by asking only for nouns and verbs. He took my statement last, not out of courtesy, but because he liked fresh ink. Daniel sat in the corner like furniture the room deserved. "By morning, doctor." Lynn's prelim read like scripture: methanol metabolites, levels inconsistent with accidental exposure, gastric contents suggesting administration via beverage. I tried not to think about cups. The DA arrived with hair that hadn't decided what it wanted, and eyes that had. She read, did not smile, and called Judge Miller's clerk for expedited warrants for devices, phones, laptops, the hard-edged private lives of men who thought their secrets lived only in whispered kitchens. Arraignment was an ugly word for a procedural morning. The courtroom looked the same. Grief didn't redecorate. Matthew stood with his lawyer, a man with cufflinks and a salt smile. Stephen's lawyer was younger and carried his pen like a knife. The charges sounded formal the way obituaries do. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction. Marina did not sit behind them. She'd learned new math overnight and didn't like her solution. Linda Warner stood with me, inksuit calm, and squeezed my elbow once when the clerk asked me to confirm my name. The prosecutor told a story made of receipts and recordings and the clean print of a lab report. When the judge asked if I wanted to address the court, I said, "No, Your Honor, because spectacle helps no one except the hungry." Bail was argued like a weather report. The judge denied. His gavel found the wood with the finality of a book slammed shut in a quiet library. News travels in small towns without legs. By afternoon, a woman I didn't know left a paper bag of sandwiches on my porch with a note that said simply, "For strength." The bag smelled like mustard and kindness. I ate half of one standing at the sink and cried a clean, surprising cry that had no old grief in it, only the exhaustion of a person who has put a heavy thing down without breaking it. The weeks after, blurred. Forensics is dull and holy. Phones gave up messages. Lasky, the agent, pled to obstruction and sang like a choir boy on a stipend. A recording surfaced from the back booth of a bar where the TVs always showed silent baseball. Matthew telling a man with a beard that debt collects interest even on love. Stephen asking if methanol smells sweet. "Only if you know to look," the man said. On paper, in chains of email and meter-long logs of calls, my sons became men without rooms to hide in. The trial didn't come fast. They never do. But when it came, it arrived like a storm you've tracked across radar for hours. Not a surprise, still a shock. I wore the gray dress again, and Thomas's watch under my sleeve. The face turned to my wrist so I could feel time, not see it. Isla sat behind me knitting something red and fierce. Clack clack, a small metronome of faith. Daniel took a row near the aisle, posture the shape of a man who listens for a living. The prosecutor kept it clean. She played only what mattered. The kitchen audio, the cloud-backed texts, the bank slips with the tired fake of Thomas's hand. "Doctor," Lynn explained methanol to 12 citizens who thought it had something to do with racing fuel and left understanding grief in molecules. Linda didn't have to speak for me. My restraint had more weight than a speech. Their lawyers tried stories. Desperation, outside influence, a corrupt agent who tricked good boys. The jury didn't like fairy tales. When the forewoman stood, her voice didn't wobble. Guilty, guilty. The words dropped into the room like coins into a jar we'd been filling for months. Small sounds, big math. When it was over, I didn't look at my sons first. I looked at the table where the exhibits lay. The ledger blue as a bruise, the clinic report white as a winter road. The still frame of my side door open to the dark. Then I looked at them. Matthew's face had collapsed into a mask I didn't recognize. Stephen mouthed something I couldn't hear. It might have been sorry. It might have been how. Outside, the air had softened. Snowmelt ran in the gutter with the small sound of a kid pouring water from a too-big cup. Isla looped her arm through mine, as if we were headed to coffee, and we were. Daniel held the door of the cafe because that's what people do when they can't fix past tense. The bell wheezed. The waitress with the bee tattoo looked older by a winter. And kinder. "Toast?" she asked, as if it were a password. "Yes," I said, "buttered." No jam. We sat in the back booth under the falls. Someone had finally scraped off the tiny blue "Don't jump," leaving a ghost of letters visible only if you knew where to look. The coffee tasted like the first day of school, and like the day you decide to go back to a house you thought you'd leave. The toast was too brown at the edges, perfect in the middle, a thing made right by heat and attention. "Justice," Isla said, simple as a noun in a sentence we had been writing for months. "Not the end," Daniel added, not to steal the moment, but to keep it honest. "No," I said, feeling my own voice come back to me like a bird that had learned the house again. "Not the end. The part where I decide what the house is for." Outside, the wind shifted. The chimes on our street answered one another like neighbors, not alarms. In my pocket, the ledger's cloth edge roughened my fingertip. I pressed there and thought, not of the kitchen, not of the side door, not of cups but of paper and pencils, and the steady good of a room where light falls right. Thomas had tapped the counter twice when he had an idea. I tapped the table twice, soft. "Books first," I said, "then children." Spring arrived with mud first, then green. The gutters rattled with meltwater, the maples along the cemetery road fattened their buds, and the bookstore's front windows fogged in the mornings from coffee pots and breath. I unlocked the side door one Tuesday in April and found 3 letters shoved under the frame, sympathy cards from women at church who had run out of casseroles, but not kindness. I set them on the counter beside the register, the blue ledger, and a stack of new paperbacks that smelled like glue and fresh ink. Business was slower, but truer. Students wandered in after school with allowance money. Retirees came for conversation disguised as browsing. I began keeping a pot of tea warm on the back table, honey in a jar with a spoon that always stuck a little. People lingered. They bought less but gave more. The store had stopped being an inheritance to argue over and returned to being a room where stories lived. Matthew and Stephen waited behind bars 2 counties over. Letters arrived from their attorneys, not them. The first was sharp, legal language, requests for old medical records, inquiries about property. The second was softer, Stephen's handwriting on the envelope, though not on the page, which was dictated through his lawyer. I never wanted it to go that far. I didn't pour it. The sentence bent in on itself like a reed in wind, true and useless at once. I folded it into the blue ledger where the forged entries lived. Family history comes in many handwritings. Marina disappeared. One day she was in the courthouse gallery, scarf tight as ever, and the next, gone. A neighbor said she'd moved back east, a new name on her mailbox. I found a bottle of her perfume under the sink weeks later, lemon, still sharp. I poured it down the drain and the kitchen smelled like summer lemonade for hours, until the pipe swallowed it whole. Isla became a daily fixture, her red coat a lighthouse crossing my street. She brought small things, tulips from the market, recipes written on lined paper, once even a broken lamp from her attic for me to tinker with. We didn't always talk about the case. Sometimes she read in the rocking chair by the window while I restocked shelves. Sometimes we argued about crossword clues. Sometimes she just listened, which is rarer than people admit. One evening, when the sky was the color of bruise giving way to lavender, she asked, "Do you think you'll forgive them?" I thought of Matthew's whisper in the courtroom, "This isn't over." Of Stephen's voice on the recording, counting drops like a child learning fractions. Of Thomas tapping the counter, warning me in silence. "No," I said finally, closing the ledger. But I think I'll stop needing to. Outside, the chimes agreed with the wind. A softer music now, less warning and more weather. The trial's aftermath carried its own noise. Reporters calling, neighbors asking sideways questions, church friends stumbling over condolences that landed too heavy. I answered little. People fill silence with their own truths. I learned to let them. The prosecutor sent updates, neat and spare. Plea negotiations denied, sentencing dates scheduled. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, words that belonged in newspapers, not kitchen tables. When the day came, Judge Miller read years into the record, numbers that will keep my sons gray before freedom. I listened without blinking. When the gavel fell, I didn't look at them. I looked at the clock on the courtroom wall, its hands moving forward regardless of verdict. Afterward, Daniel found me outside under a blooming dogwood, petals drifting like snow but warmer. "It's done," he said. "Nothing's done," I answered, though my shoulders had dropped an inch. He smiled faintly. "Done enough for tonight." He pressed a business card into my hand, plain except for his name and a phone number. "Keep it, even when you don't need me." I slipped it into the ledger. Protection, like a pressed flower. The bookstore began to change. I moved Thomas's desk to the front window so the sunlight struck the wood where his hands once rested. I kept his chair, the cushion flat and familiar. I started a weekly story hour on Saturdays, children cross-legged with juice boxes, Isla reading aloud when my voice tired. The laughter was lighter than the ceiling fans had heard in years. Neighbors donated boxes of books, some new, some worn. On the flyleaf of a battered hymnal, someone had written in pencil, "For strength, Evelyn." I placed it on a shelf near the register. Not for sale. Just to remind. One May morning, I brewed coffee and forgot to flinch at the sound of the tin lid tapping shut. The reflex was mine again, not borrowed from fear. I poured 2 cups, one for me, one for Isla, and the smell filled the house without threat. She tasted hers, wrinkled her nose, and said, "Too strong." I laughed. Laughter came easier now, though not cheap. The dreams took longer to shift. For weeks I woke at 3 a.m., convinced I heard footsteps by the stove. I'd sit up, heart a bird against cage, until the silence convinced me I was alone. Gradually, the dreams softened. Thomas's hand resting on my hip, the boys playing chess in the back room, Isla's chimes in the distance. Not warnings, but memory. One night I dreamed of the courtroom. But in the dream, the judge's bench was a library desk, the gavel, a pencil tapping, and Thomas sat beside me, smiling the way he did when students finally understood a difficult story. I woke with tears that didn't scald. Summer arrived. The hydrangeas bloomed fat and heavy, bees humming drunkenly between them. Children biked past with baseball gloves dangling from handlebars. Life carried on, as life insists. I stood once more at the counter in the bookstore, ledger closed, register humming. The door creaked open and the bell chimed. A young woman entered, hair damp from rain, eyes scanning the shelves like a pilgrim. "I heard this was the place to find books that keep you company," she said. "You heard right," I replied. My voice didn't shake. She smiled, fingers brushing spines. I let her wander, the way Thomas always did, no push, no rush. The room breathed around us, paper, dust, sunlight, possibility. When she left with a paperback wrapped in brown paper, I tapped the counter twice, soft, habit, promise, renewal. That night, as the street grew quiet and the wind chimes played their patient song, I sat with a cup of coffee and opened the ledger one last time. The forged entries were still there, circled hard. I traced the grooves, then closed the book. I didn't burn it. History is not for burning. It is for keeping, so you remember what not to repeat. I placed the ledger back under the till, where Thomas once kept it safe. Then I turned off the sunflower lamp, locked the door, and stood for a moment in the doorway between the house and the store. Half home, half work, half past, half future. "I hear you," I whispered into the quiet, not as plea this time, but as answer. The wind lifted, carrying the scent of lilies from somewhere far off, not the browning kind, but new ones, sharp and green. The chimes swayed in agreement, and for the first time since the grave, the house felt whole. In the end, Evelyn's story is less about betrayal and crime than it is about the quiet strength of paying attention. She teaches us that danger doesn't always arrive in the form of strangers or obvious threats. It can come from those closest to us, in whispers, in signatures, in small pressures disguised as care. What saved her was not grand heroics, but the steady discipline of noticing, the scrape of a shovel, the taste of lemon in a glass, the numbers in a ledger that didn't line up. It was the courage to ask questions when others told her to stop, and the resolve to trust her own memory when others tried to rewrite it. For many of us, especially in the later chapters of our lives, this lesson matters deeply. Our dignity and independence are worth protecting, and vigilance is an act of love toward ourselves. Trust your instincts, safeguard your papers, lean on friends who prove their loyalty with presence, not promises. Above all, don't let fear of conflict silence the truth you know in your bones. If Evelyn's journey speaks to you, share this story. Talk to your family about trust, about legacy, about protecting one another in ways that honor freedom, not control. Use it as a reminder that listening, noticing, and speaking up are still some of the strongest defenses we have. May your days be safe, your nights peaceful, and your homes filled with the kind of care that frees rather than binds.